Hot, humid summer days. Nothing more refreshing than a iced cold brew coffee, freshly made at home, customized to your taste and preferences for a fraction of the price you would pay outside. No fancy equipment required. Here's how I make cold brew coffee so you can make it and enjoy it at home. Come, follow me on my journey towards a happier, healthier, and freer life. Subscribe to be notified on upcoming videos. Some of you may know I launched a collection of cold weather scarves, especially designed to comfort those with sensitive skin. So if you find scarves scratchy, check out freendcat.com. What I find unique about cold brew coffee is its smooth, rich, and non-acidic mouthfeel. In terms of caffeine strength, cold brew can be made as strong as you want it to be. I'll show you how later. You can make cold brew stronger than an espresso, yet without the bitterness and acidity. If this is your first time making cold brew, I suggest starting with your favorite go-to coffee grinds and go from there. My favorite is Folgers Classic Roast. I always have that at home, so I started making cold brew using Folgers. So that's what we'll be using in this video. This is how I make cold brew coffee. I will explain some things at the end and share how you can customize this recipe to suit your taste and preferences. This recipe makes 2 glasses of coffee, which yields a total of 400 to 410 milliliters of cold brew coffee. Measure out 25 grams of your favorite coffee, preferably a medium to medium coarse grind size like this one. Use a glass container or bowl because coffee will stain plastic. The coffee to water ratio for my personal liking is 1 parts coffee to 19 parts water. This means I'll be using 475 grams of water. I split this amount to 200 grams of boiling water and 275 grams of cold filtered water. Add the boiling water to start blooming the coffee. Blooming is part of the coffee brewing process where you wet the coffee grounds and the gases and flavors in the coffee grounds are released. Then add the remaining cold filtered water. The hot water is only in contact with the coffee grounds for a few seconds. Once the cold water is added, the water temperature goes down. Some techniques use room temperature water, but I find that if I use enough hot water to wet the coffee, it blooms better and eliminates the need to stir the coffee with a spoon, which I think it's cumbersome and changes the ratio because some coffee grounds will get stuck to the spoon. Close the container and put it in the fridge for 12 to no more than 16 hours. In my experience, there's no significant difference in taste between 12 to 16 hours. I try not to cold brew more than 16 hours to avoid over extraction, which could make the coffee acidic or bitter. It's been 15 hours and it's time to filter the coffee. Here's a container, a sieve, and a flat bottom coffee filter. Carefully pour out the cold brew coffee into the filter and let it drip at its own pace. My sieve is too small to hold all the coffee, so I top up as the coffee drains. When all the coffee is filtered, use a spoon to gently press out remaining coffee. Check this out. Smooth, rich, non-acidic, homemade cold brew coffee, ready to drink or store in the fridge for up to 3 days. This is my homemade non-dairy Better Than Oat Creamer. My favorite way of enjoying cold brew coffee is 1 ice cube, 200 grams of cold brew coffee, and 60 grams of homemade Better Than Oat milk creamer. The flavors blend so well with each other. I will share with you the recipe in a later video. So subscribe to stay tuned for this homemade Better Than Oat milk creamer recipe. This cold brew coffee tastes so rich and smooth that I prefer not to have more than 1 ice cube because it will dilute the coffee. Cold brew ratio refers to the amount of coffee grounds you use to the amount of water you use to brew cold brew coffee. I think the best cold brew ratio is the ratio that produces cold brew coffee that you enjoy drinking. So that will take some experimentation. The very first cold brew I made was a 1-to-5 cold brew ratio. And a lot of sources would suggest a cold brew ratio of 1-to-4, 1-to-5, 1-to-8. So I started with 1-to-5. And the outcomes of the cold brew coffee were non-acidic, it was bold, but it was way too high in caffeine. I would say a 1-to-5 ratio cold brew coffee seems to be higher in caffeine than an espresso. I remembered having the 1-to-5 cold brew ratio at around 10 in the morning. By midnight, I was lying in bed. I could feel heart palpitations. I was not comfortable with that experience. I thought it was too strong. So the next time I made cold brew, I went to the other extreme. I tried a 1-to-25 cold brew ratio. And the outcomes of that was a little bit on the watery side. So I experimented with different ratios and it came down to 1-to-19 was the one I'm most comfortable with. So you can experiment it that way. If you can try this recipe out. If 1-to-19 ratio is not strong enough for you, you can try a 1-to-17 or 1-to-15, see how you like that. Usually I make cold brew coffee the night before, and in the morning, before I start my day, I would filter the cold brew coffee and start my morning, make my breakfast, and by the time I'm ready for the coffee, the cold brew is ready to drink. I timed out how long it takes to filter the cold brew, and it takes about 30 minutes for this amount of coffee in the recipe. If I'm only making half the amount, 250 ml of water, that would take 10 minutes. So it's really dependent on how big of a batch of cold brew you're making. If you find that it's too slow to filter, here's a hack. Usually within the first 10 minutes, you would have enough for a glass of cold brew coffee. Simply transfer the sieve containing the unfiltered coffee to another container, and now you can have your cold brew. I made cold brew coffee once using a fine grind coffee, and it took hours to filter. It was way too long to wait for a cold brew coffee, so I wouldn't do that again. Taste-wise, it's fine. I couldn't see any significant difference, but if you are curious, feel free to try and you would know. Homemade cold brew coffee has been a refreshing highlight for me this hot, humid summer. So if you haven't tried a glass of cold brew coffee or haven't tried making your own, I hope you give this a try and customize it to the way you like it. And share with us how you like your cold brew in the comments below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.